Everybody, it's Tracy from UFSAG. It is exactly 1 minute past 9. I think I'm going to start and I'll hand over to Louis now. Louis, if you'd like to just share your first screen while I rattle on a bit here. So I say good morning and welcome to our data management session presented by Louis Joubert from Glue Data Services. Do note that any questions and comments that you have can be shared within the chat, which will be monitored throughout. I do request that your mics are muted and that your video cameras are switched off. Please do be advised that the use of any external AI note-taking tools is strictly forbidden during all UFSAG webcasts, virtual sessions, and online events. Do note that the presentation and recording will be shared with all after the session and be made available from our website. Before I hand over to Louis, though, you will note in the chat there is a poll of 3 questions. We would appreciate your responses and answer them as I now hand over to Louis. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our session, and I look forward to sharing a little bit of insight to you this morning around how you can actually utilize MDG to assist your S/4HANA transformation journey. Before we jump into this, I know it's still early in the morning. I hope you all had your coffee and that you've taken a deep breath just to centralize yourself and ready for the session to be open to hear what we say this morning. I want you to just embrace yourself in this session. If you can, put down your hands, take away for a step from your laptop, make sure you have the capacity to actually engage in this session. I'd love to hear all of your feedback at the end. Without further ado, let's jump into it. So first, we need to start out by actually sharing the impact of poor data quality. So I've just got 2 very interesting facts this morning that I can share. 40% of ERP implementation failures are due to poor data quality. That's an exorbitant amount. 40%, that's almost half of all ERP implementation failures that's impacted by poor data quality. Poor master data specifically causes 20 to 30% of overruns in project cost. That's also a significant cost in terms of these large transformation journey projects. Therefore, in order to understand where poor data quality actually fits into the space and how we can use MDG to assist with that, we look at the data lifecycle. So by looking at the data lifecycle, we look here at our sunrise within the mountains at number 1 with our creation and our migration. That's our point where our data actually enters our SAP system. We go through a process of ensuring that we look at the governance. We churn that data through, put our necessary controls in place to ensure that we've got the governance around that. We move on to identifying what our data is actually looking like. We look at data quality. We look at what the meaning of that data actually provides us. We identify places for improvement. We go through a process in our number 4 of cleansing our data, making sure that that data is actually providing us with the correct meaning and the right data quality. Once we have cleansed our data, we then put structures in place to manage our data, to flow that through our system, to actually make that data not just available for our single use, but also throughout our organization. That figure 8 is a continuous process that we run through with our governance, our identification, our cleanse, and our management, consistently creating new data. And as we progress through this data lifecycle, we also got an exit point at 6. You see, from our sunrise to our sunset, we've got our data that then goes into an archiving cycle. Throughout this whole data lifecycle, it's important to look at our data quality. And that data quality, as shown by those 2 interesting facts, we have increasing business value that we can get out of great quality data. Furthermore, if we look at what that actually means for us in terms of providing data, as looking at the data pyramid in terms of our value, if we put data into context, we get information. As we gather more and more information, we can start deriving meaning. The moment information actually has meaning for us, we start gathering knowledge. More and more knowledge leads us into insight, which provides us with wisdom. As the value of data increases, it moves into the space of knowledge and wisdom. those two providing us with sufficient insight to make wise decisions. These decisions obviously leads us to these larger projects, as data is the underpinning point of all of this. Looking further, apologies for that, looking further down into what that bad data quality actually impacts on our S4 projects, we look at lost revenue opportunities. Now, it's important to make the distinct difference here. It's not cost or additional cost. It's looking at lost opportunity cost here. This is essentially looking at the stuff that we don't always measure, but we also look at what we actually lost because of required additional effort and additional timelines. It creates operational disruptions throughout our processes, as bad data quality always requires us to make additional workarounds. It requires people to do more work and spend more time to just create our day-to-day business transactions. It also leads to extended project timelines, as we highlighted with the fact at the beginning, 20 to 30% of our projects are actually increased in terms of cost and timelines due to bad master data quality. It could also lead to increased maintenance cost. This is more than just looking at the infrastructure, but also at maintaining our data on a regular basis. Ultimately, this leads to an unsuccessful transformation. That's also, again, here to make the distinction. It's not necessarily looking at an unsuccessful implementation. It is looking at an unsuccessful transformation. As we look at all of this, we have to consider that people is part of this whole project. We've got the interaction between people, processes, and technology that all three together provides us with the recipe for success. We might have a successful implementation, but the change management is also a large portion of this. And you'll see why I specifically mention this. When we look at the three main causes of poor data quality, it boils down to data entry by employees coming back to our people, changes to source systems, essentially looking at our processes that consistently changes, and then lastly, the data migration and integration projects throughout this life cycle. These are quite disruptive for large enterprises and organizations, especially when you have such a large change as to go to S4. With all of this being said, how can we actually look at addressing bad data quality as part of the project, whether it's before, whether it's during, or whether it's after the project? Let's delve a little bit deeper into what this type of architecture can mean for us. So MDG is a tool. I'm not necessarily going into the details as to explain to what MDG can do, but rather looking at the different ways that we can implement MDG. The first is for us to look at MDG as a point of starting our consolidation, our harmonization journey. Therefore, let me just grab the laser pointer here. Therefore, if we're looking here at our legacy systems, whether it's SAP systems or whether it's non-SAP systems, we can bring that into our MDG environment, which runs on its own separate S4 server, as you can see here. We go through our processes of consolidation, of reviewing our data quality, and then our consistent central data governance, which leads to our management. So bringing that back to the data lifecycle, you can see we try to cater for that whole environment throughout MDG. MDG, with its three different modules, has quite a lot of capacity and features that can actually help you to bring that into your space. As you see here with regards to the project timeline, we're bringing this a little bit forward in terms of our discovery and our prepare phase, even before we look at explore, realize, deploy, and our run phase. This is purely to assist you with starting your transformation journey earlier. The benefits of actually implementing MDG before S4HANA is by creating the principle and following that principle much sooner of getting data clean and keeping data clean. From the beginning, you have a clean slate of data that goes into your S4 environment. It provides you with the opportunity to start having these type of conversations to say, who's actually going to take ownership of the relevant data? it's always understressed in terms of how important the data ownership is to actually being able to specifically allocate people taking the data and making it their own to run with the governance to make sure that people are held accountable for keeping that data clean once you've started that cleanup process. It gives us the opportunity to have a single source of truth rather than having to look for master data at multiple resources. We have a central place that we can go to for our migration to actually extract the data and send into our relevant S4 environment. Based on our data pyramid, it gives us the opportunity to make wise decisions regarding the refinement of our business processes. Our business processes can be flawed if we base that based on bad data quality. Looking at our business processes and ensuring that they're based on the true reflection of what our data can actually be. It also gives us an opportunity to look at the people, to give them a kickstart of being exposed to SAP and to specifically S/4HANA, something simple like the business partner object, being exposed to that and seeing how that changes from ECC and even non-SAP systems, looking at how the customer and the vendor integrates into the business partner. The second option is now looking at the different scenarios. So now that I've used MDG as a starting point early on in my project, we can use MDG as a hub. Hub is essentially being able to keep MDG on its separate server, specifically dedicated for MDG, and then being able to distribute the data downstream to all the relevant S4 systems that I have, whether that's regional, whether that's country, whether that's local, whatever the case might be. For us having multiple instances of S4, this is a great use of MDG being able to integrate into those separate systems, creating that central maintenance. The benefits, as I mentioned, with the central data governance is it gives you the opportunity to keep that data isolated in your MDG environment, ensure that it conforms to your governance requirements, all your rules, all your processes before it is sent into your actual central finance or other systems that's utilized throughout your organization. It reduces the complexity on your actual team as you have the central hub for maintaining master data once and have that single record created and then distributed across your different environments. As there's a clear distinction between the two systems, there's no performance impact on S/4HANA when you implement as a hub. It gives you the opportunity to do separate upgrades for the two systems. It gives you the opportunity to do maintenance separate without having to impact your S/4HANA systems. It also allows, as I mentioned, for the opportunity to do harmonization and consolidation of all your upstream systems, whether that is CRM or Ariba, whatever the case might be, to actually harmonize and consolidate that data before distributing it downstream to all your relevant S4 systems. The second scenario is looking at that same example where we started out, but rather than implementing a separate server for MDG and then multiple new servers for S4, if we only have one requirement for our S4 environment, we can start looking at a co-deployment, meaning we leverage the same S4 environment that we have MDG running on for our actual central finance implementation, therefore creating the opportunity to shift our timeline a little bit forward and allowing us to essentially start utilizing this server and this implementation from the get-go. It provides us with an opportunity to, rather than doing a whole new implementation, to actually reuse that, leading to lower infrastructure cost. You no longer have to build separate systems for specifically dedicated S4 systems and specific dedicated systems for MDG. It simplifies the landscape in the sense that you have real-time access to your data. It gives you that opportunity to maintain within that one single system without any additional integration efforts. It also looks at a faster S/4HANA implementation, as I mentioned, bringing that timeline a little bit forward. Now, looking at the different ways of implementing SAP MDG, we've spoken about the two different scenarios of our architecture with our co-deployment and our hub deployment. those are just looking at the different ways that you can look at the architecture. Now, that comes with a caveat, right? There's no one size fits all here. It's always a conversation. It's always a journey that you go on through with whomever helps you with that implementation. We normally take our clients through a whole process of making sure that we not just look at the right architecture today, but looking at the future. And therefore, you don't just look at the architecture in isolation, but you do that across the project for your migration as well. In order to get the full benefit of MDG, you have to look at how you're going to use that system. Now, these are just some ways that you can actually utilize MDG, and the one is the embedded master data governance. This specifically speaks to organizations that goes to the single entity of S/4HANA, and that's looking at a single source of truth without the complicated need to do further integration for your master data. The ideal implementation style there would be a code deployment and looking at all three of your modules to ensure that your data is actually managed correctly. If we look at master data consolidation, this is essentially for companies that's only looking to merge and cleanse their master data from multiple sources before migration. So once again, using this as a mechanism to prepare and cleanse our data before it goes into our S4 environment. You'll see here we've actually taken out the central data governance component and we're only focusing on consolidation and our data quality evaluation, giving us the insight into being able to consolidate our SAP and our non-SAP records into one, identifying our best records, and being able to gauge our data quality so we can fix that at source. It provides us with the opportunity to identify duplicates and to harmonize those records. Going through to the next example, we're looking at a centralized master data governance implementation. This is once again looking at organizations with multiple ERP systems that's requiring a central place of governance. This is a hub approach, as I mentioned, with the architecture, looking at creating a separate environment for your MDG space and then separating and distributing that to all the relevant areas. Lastly, we're looking at the decentralized master data governance. Now, this is a little bit more of a complicated environment. This is where we're starting to look at a hybrid type of model. Not only do we create a separate system that can be used for S/4HANA, either for a hub approach or a code deployment approach, but allows you to create a component where you have a centralized global record and then distribute the relevant records to the relevant regional implementations and then further enhance that data, giving you the opportunity and autonomy throughout your regional spaces so that your data can be enriched. You can also see here, we have that arrow flowing back into your MDG space, making sure that whatever changes you do is also reflected in your central environment so that it can be shared across the board for all the relevant changes. Now, where is all of this taking us? What does this actually mean for you today as part of your journey? If we look into our S4 project and to our transformation journey as clients, we look at this implementation and we ask these type of questions. There's so much to consider, but specifically for MDG, we're starting to look at your implementation timing. Now, the first component is to talking about implementing MDG before our data migration. If we implement MDG before our data migration, we have to spin up a separate server for being able to utilize MDG. However, the benefit gives us that we start with data cleansing from the very beginning. We give the opportunity to start with standardization, with harmonization and consolidation. All of this gives us the opportunity to start our data lifecycle with essentially a much earlier turnaround time, giving the input into the migration processes for a smoother migration process and giving us the opportunity to ensure that whatever data goes into our processes and our decisions is actually conforming to our standards. It gives us the opportunity to reduce the risk regarding these large projects, especially for our migration component. However, the drawbacks for this is obviously a lot of upfront cost and effort. as you need to bring these teams in to have these type of conversations and to have these decisions made up front, to spend the actual time and ensure that you look at the future of how you're going to use MDG. The complexity of reusing MDG after your data cleansing upfront to your S4 implementation is quite complicated if it is poorly executed. We've seen where you've actually had to change the whole implementation just based on the fact that the reference data and organizational structure hasn't been set up correctly. So there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of benefits in looking at implementing MDG before your data migration. If we look at during our data migration, this is our most common approach throughout all our clients. It gives us the opportunity to actually utilize MDG as a staging and validation area. Above and beyond our data migration, it gives us the opportunity to gauge our data governance and ensure that's implemented across the board. Coming back to the keep data clean and get data clean principle, MDG then allows us to do that throughout the project. As you have all the teams already mobilized, everybody already identified for having these type of conversations, MDG is there to support with your standard validations and your mappings. It gives you the opportunity to utilize MDG in its fullest extent to actually ensure that your relevant leveraging of the S4 project is not necessarily misused. The drawback, however, is change management resistance. I can't stress enough how many of our clients actually has had massive challenges with regards to change management and people pushing back because of the large changes. As you do this as part of a migration project, it's not only one change, but it's also changes in processes of managing this data. Therefore, being able to actually get people on board is quite a large challenge throughout these projects. As I mentioned, doing the before data migration gives you that opportunity for people to actually get exposed to your S4 environment before you look at the data migration, and then start slowly but surely building up their tolerance and giving them the opportunity to change and adapt. It is quite expensive due to the fact that there's an increased timeline and increased effort that is purely based on the fact that you can actually look at your MDG project that runs in parallel to your S4 environment. Because you have your SIT and your UAT sessions already scheduled, you leverage off of that and you can make use of those sessions to actually get the relevant benefit out of that. If we look at implementing MDG after the data migration project, there's a lot of benefit in doing this purely based on the fact that you can actually have a data quality assurance after the fact, making sure that now you've put in all that effort to transform and clean your data in preparation for the project and also implementing. Now you need to put that process in place to ensure that you have the continuous governance, to make sure you have the controls and the rules in place to actually create an environment where you can consistently measure and control your data, to actually be able to reuse the understanding of people now that they've had the opportunity to get exposed to SAP, get exposed to the ways of working for S4. They have a much better understanding of SAP, and it gives them, once again, the wisdom and the knowledge and the insight to make informed decisions about MDG. That gives us the opportunity to reuse that logic and the opportunity to actually see where we are going in that regard, and sense to actually ensure that not only are we looking at MDG implementation, but also in the future state of how things will be working as that point onwards, where a lot of the time in your migration projects, you have a large focus on how to change your data from the legacy system to put that into your S4 system, whereas your focus here shifts into how can I put a solution in place to ensure that it's a long-term solution for my MDM processes. However, the drawbacks with that is looking at a reactive approach. Now, if you've already spent all this time, effort, and money to implement S4, you're actually using a tool after the fact to implement your controls, where you could have reaped the benefit from cleansing data and having great quality data for master data upfront for the actual project. This leads to additional effort for cleanup. It will actually provide you and highlight all the gaps that you might have missed, and it will give you the opportunity to clean that up. However, obviously always coming at the cost of additional effort. The last implementation timing is an ad hoc implementation. This is just looking at giving us the opportunity to see, well, I don't necessarily want to use MDG as a specific driver for my S/4HANA transformation journey. I just want to implement MDG. There's a lot of benefit in this regard where you've got a little bit more flexibility with your deployment. You can look at code deployment, you can look at hub deployment, whichever is suited to your requirement. It's not necessarily reliant on your S4 project. It is purely looking at the benefit that you can get from by implementing MDG. It gives you the opportunity to have targeted data governance, meaning you can now actually look at only certain objects. You can have a piecemeal approach in this regard, creating a cost-effective approach. It gives you the opportunity to first, let's say, focus on materials, focus on articles, whatever the case might be, to then slowly but surely implement your governance at a extended time of period of time, instead of having, let's call it, the big bang approach. The drawbacks of this is sometimes fragmented governance. If you don't implement as part of a larger project, it gives quite a dictator type of style to the governance that's being put into place, and some people have it and some people don't, and it gives a fragmented response to your governance, and that's quite challenging when you look at the maintenance. Also creates silos throughout your business. You've got great data quality for your material, but not necessarily for your business partners, your customers and your vendors. Therefore, there's obviously a lot of benefits and a lot of drawbacks for each of these implementation timings. Now, equipped with all of this, this is essentially where you need to go and start making decisions about how can you look at improving your data quality. Now, I'm going to leave you with this quote. If we look here, this is a quote from Elon Musk, our favorite South African. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is a disaster. Therefore, all that I'm asking from you today, it's a short and sweet session, is to start looking at your ways of how you are going to use MDG in your environment. MDG is a great tool, and MDG is a great driver for putting that governance into place to assist you with actually knocking down the impact of bad data quality in your environment. That's me for today. Thank you, everyone. It's a short and sweet session. I hope you enjoyed that. Any questions from anybody?
Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks, Louis, for the presentation. So, Vincent Grobler from Mercedes-Benz, South Africa. I would just like to find out, we are heavily focused in test automation using Tricentis Tosca within our SAP layout, right, at this point in time. So, is there anything that you can suggest to use for data management in our, let's say, test data that we try and manage within our test automation framework? Can this also work for us? I don't know if you have experience in this, maybe.
Not necessarily, Vincent, but if I can try playing back your requirement, essentially you're asking whether MDG can assist you with creating and maintaining test data, right? That is actually reflecting your production environment. So one of the things that's great about MDG is that it has the capability for integration. Now, with integration comes the opportunity to replicate data to multiple environments. So ways that we've used MDG before is to maintain your data in a production environment, right? Or whichever environment while you're still going through that process, but you then maintain your best possible data. in that environment, and you have the opportunity to then integrate to all your other non-prod environments and share the same data, whether that's for financial data, whether that's for customer supplier materials, a little bit more challenging, but the opportunity is there for integration across the board, allowing MDG to create data that is still governed and then to share that with all your non-prod environments. So yes, we've done is we've either gone that approach or we've changed it up and we've actually utilized the same controls in all our non-prod environments. So whenever functionals or any business people create data, that they still have to conform to the same controls that's in our production environment, thus ensuring that you create data that's still of high data quality. I hope that helps you, Vincent.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. It gives us, I think, something to think about. Definitely to maintain our data. Apologies for the noise in the background. I am in office. So I think it's gives us something to think about how to maintain our data and also how to use clean data or how to produce clean data that we can use within our, let's say, test automation framework. Thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Vincent.
Anyone else? Vina, please go ahead.
Morning, Tracy. Morning, Louis. Thanks for the session and sharing. One thing I wanted to check is that on SAP MDG, I mean, has the offering, especially for data migration projects and transformation, the scope of objects that I usually considered is quite vast, right? And maybe it's since then changed, but with my prior experience and exposure with evaluating SAP MDG, it was limited, I'll call it, to the big five, your customer, your material, your GL, cost center, and then an additional add-in for equipment and your EBOs. Is it still that case? And then when I was then working with, the technology side of things, I see through SAP's BTP platform, there's now the whole simple MDG. I mean, you want to maybe share your thoughts around this? Because I think, for managing data governance and management through a transformation project, it's scope and coverage that's going to be so important. And, it's all the other objects, especially where you've got industry solutions, specific objects. So I don't know if you want to maybe just share your thoughts around that.
Certainly, Avina. So it hasn't changed. We've still got the big five. So you've still got your finance objects, GL account, cost center, profit center, the hierarchies, etc. You've still got material, customer, supplier, business partner. You've got your EAM, so your enterprise asset management, coming from your extensions, like you mentioned, from the Prometheus group. And then also you've got your fashion and retail management, specifically focus on article. Even though it's just focus on those five, these five objects are we call them the core master data objects, right? And it boils down to that foundational impact, looking at your very bottom layer of data and ensuring that's correct. If those are part of your data governance, you've essentially got great quality data to utilize for all your processes going forward, right? If you have those maintained and you put the impact and the effort in terms of ensuring that those are correct, everything you do going forward is based on that good foundation of data quality. Yes, there's a lot of other objects that we'd like to be part of the MDG suite, but they do have the opportunity to add custom objects, right? So you can always build your own custom objects to extend to whatever object you'd like. There's obviously complexity and a lot of customization and effort in as part of that, but they've built the functionality for you to do that. When it comes to the BTP side of it and more of the cloud mode for MDG, it's a little bit limited in my opinion at this point, because they've only got business partner up to now. They're looking at the very near future and bringing in material, and then moving on with the other objects as well. They haven't put a specific timeline on that on the roadmap, unless that's changed to my knowledge. But at this point in time, there's still a lot of growth required on the cloud mode. However, they brought in the cloud ready mode that allows you with the private cloud and with the on-premise solution, that you can actually start using cloud ready mode to prepare you for that shift and give you the opportunity to do a modular approach. So utilize the cloud ready mode for BP and then still use the classic mode for all your other objects. I hope that answers your question.
No, thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Vincent left a question in the chat. Can you see the chat, or do I need to read it out to you?
Okay, so I see, Vincent, you posed a question if whether there's a trial version of MDG and what we can use as a POC or a first trial. If not, what is the cost of implementing the solution? So it's quite an interesting question there, Vincent. We as Glue Data, we don't sell MDG. It's a product that's still sold with SAP. But that is something that you have to engage with your SAP representative, and they'd be able to give you an opportunity in terms of getting to the exact cost. However, we help with the solution in terms of implementing it. When it comes to a POC, essentially, I think the best approach would be to implement MDG with, let's call, the focus of your ad hoc implementation that's very targeted on specific objects, giving you the opportunity to see how you can actually start using that to your benefit. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that question, Vincent?
Yes, thanks for the clarification. I just would like to find out, just to also clarify, in your previous statement, you said that MDG is only available for the BTP on, let's say, cloud or cloud ready, and all of the other modules like SE16, all of these other modules, that is still on a, let's say, local deployment of solution manager, right? Is that correct? Where your data is being handled, just to understand.
No, so just to clarify, there's the three ways that you implement S4, right? You've got the on-premise, the private, and the public cloud, right? If you look at on-premise and the private cloud, MDG has what they call the classic mode. So meaning that you still get the full functionality of all the objects, the 5 that we mentioned, with a lot of extra features as well. When you look at the public cloud, you have to use the cloud mode. The cloud mode is at the moment just available for the object business partner. It doesn't have any of the 5 objects just yet. So they're still working on that. So you would still have to use another tool or your standard ways of working in the public cloud for that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for clarifying. Okay, then I misunderstood that, but yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Anyone else?
I see Yandisa posted, how big is the MDG market in the country currently? That's a very good question, Yandisa. I mean, I'm not a salesperson, but I can give you my opinion. I think it's because MDG is such an expensive tool and such a fantastic tool in a sense in terms of features, right? So it's more geared towards larger companies out there. And obviously, when we look at larger, I'm talking about the much larger organizations out there throughout the global. I think the MDG market in South Africa is smaller than compared to, let's say, the USA and all of that. But there is still quite a lot of clients in South Africa that make use of MDG. So that there is sufficient usage of MDG in South Africa, and that's constantly growing for a lot of people.
Hope that helps. Anyone else? Louis, I'm going to stop recording on behalf of the Data Management Steering Committee and our community. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you everyone for joining us. Like I said in the introduction, the presentation and recording will be shared on our website. Just give us 24 hours to turn it around. But having said that, I am going to give you each 20 minutes back. Have a great day, everyone. Don't forget about Sapila. Stay well, stay safe. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Louis.
Everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, bye.